Hi, Rotimi Sariki here. I'd like to let you know that this course will be going live shortly. And if you'd like to be one of the first people to get access to the course, head over to my website link in the description of this video. If you're amongst the first 40 people to join the waiting list by January 31st of 2025, you will receive a 50% discount on the initial price of the course. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to you joining the course. Remember, it's not real until you make it look unreal. Welcome back. In this portion of the video, I'd like to discuss the general workflow involved in extracting your CAD data or CAD data you've received from your architect from Revit. I will also touch on some things you need to consider and look out for when requesting Revit files from your architect or designer. Because Revit is widely used in the architecture design industry, it is important to understand some basic things about the software as it relates to architectural visualization. With the basic introduction done and dusted, let's jump into Revit to get started. So here we are in Revit. When you open Revit for the very first time, you double click on the icon. This is the very first window you're going to be met with. So in this window, it's going to show you some of the projects you've opened before or some of the sample projects that comes with Revit. In this case, I've opened some projects previously before recording this video. But let's jump ahead and just get into how we can go inside of Revit once you've gotten your files from the architect or the designer who you're going to be working with to create your architectural visualization. To open your files in Revit, you just have to come to under the models, you click on the open button and you navigate to where you've saved your file. In this case, I've saved my file in the downloads portion, and then I'm just going to navigate to it, and I want to double click on the file to open it. Because this file was saved in a previous format of Revit, it's going to upgrade the file to 2025. I'm in Revit 2025. You could be working in an older version of Revit, but I am currently working in Revit 2025. So once you open Revit, you're going to be met with a bunch of windows. The top panel is will be familiar to you if you've ever used any kind of modeling software. The top panel is always your tabs for certain things, certain actions you want to perform. So here you have the architecture tab, and then you have the structure tab, you have steel, precast, and so most of these things are pertaining to actions you want to perform inside of Revit. For us doing architectural visualization, we're not concerned with most of this. What we want to pay attention to is the architecture tab, or mostly I should say is the windows down here, the properties window and the project browser window. That's where you want to put most of your attention if you're going to be creating architectural visualization, and more so if you're going to be extracting CAD data from Revit to be used inside of, say, 3D Studio Max before getting into Unreal Engine. The ultimate goal for us in this course is to get to Unreal Engine, so that's what we're going to focus on. So when you open Revit, you're met with a view. Typically, the view you're met with is the last view that was opened before the last person who saved the file saved it. So in this case, it's this 3D view. This is the view that was opened last, and this was the view that the person saved the file with last. So we have a 3D view here, and generally, if, say for instance, you open the Revit file and you're met with, let's say, a plan view like this, all you have to do is navigate down, because Revit is broken down into certain tabs in the project browser. All you have to navigate down to is find your 3D views. And your 3D views are generally the areas where you want to focus on before you extract your files. Your CAD data from Revit has to be extracted from a 3D view in order for you to have 3D assets that you can use inside of 3D Studio Max, and Unreal Engine. And again, I'll emphasize the fact that this course is focused on Unreal Engine and not necessarily 3D Studio Max, but we are going to be going through 3D Studio Max, but the focus is to finally get into Unreal and do some things in Unreal to get all of our animations and renderings out of Unreal. With that being said, what I'm going to do now is just close out of this, and then I will open some of this 3D views that have been created. So I'll double click on it to open any view, any 3D view. You just have to navigate to it in the project browser and just double click on it. So you can see there's an interior view that was set up here with some furniture and some stairs. And then I'll just double click on the night rendering view as well. This basically is the same view but was set up for night rendering. So ultimately what we want to do is not just export from this view here, because we don't know if in this view some things have been turned on or off. One of the things you want to look out for when you're working inside of Revit is filters. So most architects, when they're working in Revit, they tend to turn things on and off in order for them to be able to work faster or not be slowed down by the software itself, because things are very complex in Revit. You have a lot of elements because every single item is being documented and drawn. So in order for you to be able to see things that are turned on or off in a view, you can basically push the hotkey V twice. And what that would do is just bring up the visibility graphics. And in the visibility graphics, you can go to the model categories. And in the model categories is where you can basically find out if something is turned on or off. In this case, I'm scrolling through. It looks like everything is turned on here. And the way you would know if something is turned off in terms of visibility is to look at all of these checkboxes. If any of them are turned off, you can basically figure out that, okay, that's turned off, but I need it. But it's also good for you to be able to figure out things you want to export or don't want to export. So basically, you see all of these things are elements inside of the model. Say the sprinkler, for instance. If you don't need that, you can basically just turn that off. And then what you do is uncheck the box, and then you just say, I want to turn it off by view. So it's going to be turned off in this current view that you're in now. Any filter you apply is by view. So you want to make sure that when you apply a filter, you're exporting from that view. So that is basically the filters category. So in terms of the visibility graphics, turning on filters or turning them off is what's going to help you reduce the size of things that you want to export out of Revit. So I'm going to cancel out of this because I don't want to turn anything off. Most of what is in here I need to export. So I'm basically going to go over to 3D aerial view instead of this view, a view where everything is shown. And I'll just click on that. And then once we get into this view, you can see that it's showing us the entire model and the site topography as well. So if you want, because we're going to be working with exteriors and rendering exterior animation and stills inside of Unreal, it is best to export your model from an exterior view like this, a 3D view that's making everything visible, so you can see the roads, you can see the topography, and you can see the entirety of the building. So what we have to do next is just come over to File, and we go over to Export. Now, there are several file formats here that you can export. And you can see up here, there are CAD formats that you can export as well. Typically, you would want to export a DWG, but I do not recommend a DWG if your ultimate goal is to get into Unreal. It's a simplified version of your geometry. And say, for instance, if you have a very complex model inside of Revit that's, double curved walls or things like that, if you go with a DWG, your geometry may turn out broken by the time you get into your DCC software like 3D Studio Max before exporting into Unreal Engine. So what we want to do instead is come over to FBX. FBX is generally a good format to end up with when you get into Unreal or even in 3D Studio Max. So what we'll do now is just click on the FBX button for the export, and then you can navigate to where you want to save the file. As you can see, I've already saved one file in my downloads folder, and what I'm just going to do is just overwrite the file and just save on top of it. So it's asking me that the file exists and do I want to replace it. I'll say yes because I've saved it before. So I just click on yes. And typically, depending on how big your model is, if your model is quite big inside of Revit, meaning it's a big project with lots of components, a lot of Revit components in there, lots of windows, lots of ductwork or things like that, it may take a few minutes to sometimes it may take maybe an hour to export the model. It all depends on the size of the model. Some projects are really, really big. In my experience, I've worked with really, really large Revit files inside of Revit before going into 3D Studio Max and then Unreal Engine. But the goal is to understand the project, the size of the project, and the filters and things you need to turn off before exporting. Because it's not just about exporting your model from Revit. You also have to consider the fact that the model has to go inside 3D Studio Max and Unreal. You're going to have to do some cleanup work, and I'm going to go over the cleanup work that needs to be done by the time we get into 3D Studio Max. But for now, all of your takeaway from this is that when you're exporting your model, you should talk to your architect and figure out how the file is set up inside of Revit, if there are any filters you should be turning on or off, how that is set up. You can talk with them, you can have a conversation with them if that's possible. Sometimes it's not possible to have that conversation. They just send you a file and you're having to work really, really fast to get them the renderings, because typically architectural visualization is a very, very fast industry. People always want things last minute, and you have to adapt to it. Sometimes you have the flexibility of saying no to your client, but sometimes you don't, depending on the relationship you have with the architect or the architecture company. You can put them on a schedule and let them know when you want the files to be handed over to you. But again, having that conversation with the architect is very important. It makes things go a long way, and it makes things easier for you in the long run because you understand the pitfalls and you understand how the model is structured, and then you can basically work faster because you pre-plan how you're going to export the model and you pre-plan how you're going to import the model into 3D Studio Max, and then by the time you get into Unreal, you already have a plan. So I hope all of this information I have given you just now about exporting your model from Revit has clarified some things in terms of working with architects who are working inside of Revit. And then it has clarified how you can get your model out of Revit into 3D Studio Max and then into Unreal. In the upcoming lessons, we're going to be talking about some plugins like Datasmith that's going to help you import your model into Unreal Engine. But before we get to that, we're going to be discussing some certain things that you should keep in mind before you export your model into Unreal Engine. So stick with me, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thank you. Hi, Rotimi Sariki here. I'd like to let you know that this course will be going live shortly. And if you'd like to be one of the first people to get access to the course, head over to my website link in the description of this video. If you're amongst the first 40 people to join the waiting list by January 31st of 2025, you will receive a 50% discount on the initial price of the course. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to you joining the course. Remember, it's not real until you make it look unreal.